But first, the Justice Department says FBI agents have already finished their examination of documents seized from former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. This could potentially impact a federal judge's decision to appoint a special master to review the very same evidence. Meanwhile, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, is now conducting an assessment of the classified materials found at Mar-a-Lago to determine any potential risks to national security. For more on this and to untangle the spaghetti, let's bring in CBS News Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa and CBS News Chief National Affairs and Justice Correspondent Jeff Pegues. Jeff, I want to start with you. What are the potential national security implications of what the Justice Department is investigating here from Mar-a-Lago?
If you speak with law enforcement, as I do, the concern hasn't been politics. It's been about these kinds of government secrets falling into the wrong hands. And even though we're talking about a former president here, there is a good chance that that could happen at Mar-a-Lago because, and you probably heard about this, there aren't those kinds of secure rooms that you would typically view this kind of information that we're talking about here. So the concern is that it could fall into the wrong hands. The concern is that it could compromise sources and methods. The concern is that it could do lasting damage to national security, and that is why there is this urgency right now to get these documents back.
So, Bob, we have, it seems to me, at least two baskets that we need to deal with. One is what Jeff was talking about, which is how much of a threat to national security these documents are and whether the president should have had them in the first place. Then there's this question of a special master and how they should be handled. Would you explain the special master part of this, what it means, and what's the point of having a special master?
John, good to be with you. A special master is a legal request that has been made by Trump in previous episodes in his life when he's been dealing with certain legal issues. And what it does is it has an independent lawyer come into an investigation and conduct a review of the evidence as a neutral party. The challenge for the Trump lawyers at this point is that we are weeks away from when this search occurred at Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. And the Department of Justice said today in a filing that they are done with their review of the evidence. And they have reviewed the evidence with what's called a filter team or a taint team to try to sort out any sort of attorney-client material that might not be part of the investigation and should be returned. And so the Justice Department is essentially saying, without saying it yet in a formal filing, we're done with our review. Essentially, there's probably not a need for a special master at this point, but we have to be on our toes and watch Tuesday what exactly the Justice Department does in its filing about a special counsel. I know this is a lot of legal back and forth, but the key thing to remember is today the Justice Department said, we're done our review, and this comes as a preview of sorts of their Tuesday filing when they will formally take a stand on whether they want a special master or not.
And Jeff, as Bob just mentioned, the Justice Department has said they've already done their work and found no conflict. In terms of what the National Intelligence Agency is looking at here, that is a separate scrub from this question of whether something was taken that might be private or privileged. Is that right? There's sort of two ways of looking at it, and one is from the national security perspective, and the other is whether something was taken that shouldn't have been taken because it's private and belongs to the former president.
Yeah, the current president was actually asked about this last week by a reporter whether there was going to be some sort of intelligence assessment undertaken because of the level of classification that we're talking about here with these documents that were found and that frankly could still be at Mar-a-Lago. And so there is an effort on the part of the intelligence community to get on top of whatever may still be out there, whatever they have back. But as far as the FBI's filter teams and their work, they did find some information that they said could qualify as attorney-client privileged kind of information. So we'll have to see what that does. But as Bob pointed out, You know, the fact that the filter teams have already been working on this stuff at the FBI suggests, you know, to anybody who's following this legal drama unfold, that the Trump team may be just a step behind here. The FBI is doing its work, it's proceeding. Listen, I've talked to people in law enforcement who say they want to get this behind them. It does not benefit them, nor does it benefit the country to have this as an ongoing issue for months and months and months. So at the end of the day, sometime this week, we could find out that this request for a special master, which some people view as an attempt by the Trump lawyers to gum up the works, it could fail because it may not be necessary any longer.
And finally, Bob, I want to get your political take on. We've been talking about the legal thicket here, but what's your assessment of how Republicans, Donald Trump is still the leader of their party, are responding to this and the political situation that it puts the Republican Party in?
It's a fluid situation politically. Just weeks ago, many supporters of former President Trump rallied to his side once they learned of the FBI search at his Mar-a-Lago estate. And it was sort of a galvanizing moment for the Trump wing of the Republican Party. But since that has happened, the dynamics inside the Republican Party have shifted in the sense that there is more anxiety now about the GOP's chances of winning majorities in Congress this fall in the midterm elections. Republicans in the strategist world, Republicans on Capitol Hill are telling CBS News that they look at what happened in Kansas at the vote on abortion rights, Biden ticking up in the polls, and they wonder if the GOP's chances are fading a bit compared to what they were earlier this summer. And now they have the Trump legal challenges injecting all of this uncertainty into the midterm discussion. So Trump is going to return to the campaign trail on Saturday this week in Pennsylvania, near where President Biden grew up in the Scranton-Wilkes-Barre area. But as he heads to Pennsylvania, he's in a political moment where, yes, his supporters are with him, but many top Republicans are concerned about Trump's standing legally, Trump's standing politically, and how Trump-aligned candidates are faring in many races across the country.
That's right. And two of those candidates for governor and Senate in Pennsylvania, key races that we'll be watching. Bob Costa and Jeff Pegues in Washington, thank you both.